Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. The clock has turned a full circle for former IB Chief Dineshwar Sharma, who was appointed the centre's special representative in Kashmir on Monday, 25 years after his first posting for the bureau in the valley. It was May 1992. Militancy was at its peak and Sharma, then 36, arrived in Srinagar after completing a year of customary training at the Intelligence Bureau headquarters in New Delhi. The Kerala cadre officer, who was posted as assistant director between 1992 to 1994, went on to head the IB from 2014 to 2016. On Monday, he was appointed special representative for the government's sustained dialogue process for peace in the valley. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the government's new Kashmir initiative. Joining me on the program today are Rana Banerjee, former Special Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat; Ansari, former Interlocutor on Jammu and Kashmir; Rajesh Ramachandran, Editor-in-Chief of The Outlook; and David Devdas, Senior Journalist and Author, will join us on the phone line from Kashmir. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Banerjee, I'd like to begin with you, of course. Much has been said about Kashmir. The government has done quite a bit over the last few years as well to try and deal with the Kashmir problem. The latest development, what are your observations on that?
Well, it's a positive step. It was long in coming, but now that there is an appointment, I think it will be very useful to reach out to very many people who are waiting to be heard. And it will have to be a combination of a political process firstly, and also it would involve possibly a going back or a reaching back to the Hurriyat conference leadership also. So withdrawing of the so-called red lines which this government had drawn for itself about 3 years back. And also it would require, in my view, a special effort to address the widespread alienation of the student community in particularly the valley. So this is going to be a difficult process and a long process, but nevertheless it's a welcome step.
A positive step, but a difficult time ahead is what you're suggesting at the moment. Let me bring in Rajesh Ramachandran, Editor-in-Chief of The Outlook, into the picture now. Rajesh, as far as the government's policy towards Kashmir is concerned, after taking an aggressive stand over the last 3 years or so, what has led to this situation of suddenly talking about talks in Kashmir?
Well, an aggressive stand or a muscular policy has to reach a stage where talks have to begin. So in that sense, this is probably the best thing that could have happened in tackling the Kashmir issue. There was a muscular policy, there was an aggressive stand, and then the armed forces have been able to bring situation under control to a great extent, not completely, obviously we all know that. And then the government has shown its willingness to talk, and that it is sensitive to the concerns, to the grievances, to the aspirations of the people. And I think the most interesting aspect, the most significant rather, is the choice of the interlocutor. Former chief of the Intelligence Bureau being chosen to be the special representative is a very, very interesting and significant choice, primarily because nobody knows the situation as best as the IB, and IB gives all the inputs to the governments of the day, and also because IB represents to a great extent the concerns and interests of the Indian state. So a former IB chief being chosen as the interlocutor, as a special representative, is very significant and very, very interesting. And that too, a person like Dineshwar Sharma, a very soft-spoken, amiable person who is very discreet.
As a former interlocutor yourself, Mr. Ansari, would you say that the choice of Dineshwar Sharma is the right choice at this point in time, or would you have preferred an astute politician maybe to deal with the several aspects, of the problems in Kashmir?
Many of our army chiefs who have worked in Kashmir and those who have looked after the security related issues. They have said that the army and the security forces have done what they could do. The political process which needs to begin in Kashmir, and for which a sustained dialogue is necessary. So in this context, I entirely agree with my panelists that the sustained dialogue process and its initiation is a positive step. But we have to see that what is really the problem that we need to solve. You know, if you consider that it is a political problem and a political problem faced because of the attitude and working of the separatist leaders, or the way Pakistan has been behaving the whole matter, probably we could have got not one but a team of persons who would have more experience in democratic, diplomatic and the political negotiations and so on and so forth. Now the government has been in the last 3.5 years has been adopting a more brutal approach, you know, to suppress, which seems to have failed. At the same time, the government has also tried to have agenda of alliance with the PDP, that is also crumbling. You know, a number of PDP members are workers are being attacked. A very important PDP senior leader has also left only 2 days ago. So that shows that the appointment of the government representative at the time when the PDP-BJP alliance had not been working well, when you know, the use of army security forces, the way they have been managing, that has also not worked well. And at the same time, we see that the US Secretary of State is visiting India today via Afghanistan and Pakistan. You know, so that shows that probably we have looked at you know, the Kashmir problem again, not from the point of view of a political problem, but we are looking at it from the prism of intelligence and the security. So that, I think that needs to be to have some consistency. At the same time, there are reports that whether or not the government representative will reach out to the Hurriyat. Now, Hurriyat has been facing charges, you know, under Hawala transactions, etc. Many of them are behind the bars. Earlier, Dr. Manmohan Singh, Bajpayee ji and Advani have also talked to them, but now this government is also saying that they are the proxies of the Pakistan and therefore they are not stakeholders, they will not reach out. So you are not reaching to the separatists, you are not reaching to Pakistan, then who are you going to talk to? Now, the youth, of course, I don't know how the youth are organized, but for youth, you have at the center level Prime Minister Scholarship Scheme and also for employment Udan scheme, which is implemented from the center. And these schemes in the last 6 years or so have not been implemented in letter and spirit. So if the government representative is able to do something in the areas of improving employment situation, improving the law and order situation by way of assuring aspirations of the people, by way of reducing the human rights violation, by way of you know, reducing the losses of the people because of the use of pellet guns, etc. So, and also seeing that the AFSA and the PS considered to be the draconian laws, they are also withdrawn. So if the government representative is able to apply the healing teach, about which the Prime Minister has said also.
So basically what you're suggesting is there is no single silver bullet that can solve the problem in Kashmir. We need to take, you know, a widespread view and bring several of these issues under control is what you're suggesting. You know, let me go across to David Devdas, who joins us from Kashmir on the phone line right now, who's in the midst of everything that's happening and who is the closest to what's happening there in Kashmir. You know, David, as far as, you know, the aggressive approach is concerned, Ansari has just suggested that it has not worked and it's time to change things on the ground in Kashmir. Would you say that we are moving in the right direction and things need to change drastically if we have to see some kind of peace in Kashmir?
Certainly things need to change drastically because things are, I'm less sanguine, let's say, than some others. I of course welcome this step, and it's a very good thing that talks have been initiated. I just wish that it had been done 2 or 3 years ago. The fact is that the policy of the government has been intelligence-led by specifically Mr. Doval from the beginning. And now this seems to represent a change of line. But again, an IB person who I have heard good things about personally, but an IB person is in charge. Now, I have my own reservations about how much IB has been on the ball for the last 30 years. I'm talking about, I have documented in my book how lacking intelligence was on every front, the various intelligence agencies. In 1989, when militancy came up. Again, in 2007, 2008, when I was talking about how the youth were very unhappy and there was going to be an explosion, IB apparently had no idea. Again, when Burhan Wani was killed, I think the inputs about what the impact of such a killing would be were lacking. And so I do wish the representative all the very best, but I don't know if there is going to be much confidence on the ground. Also, already, the Hurriyat has said that it is not willing to talk. Now, I had interviewed Umar the Mirwais in November 2015, a little less than 2 years ago, and he was so eager that talks be held, that some kind of engagement occurred, and at that time, I'm sorry to say the government was not in the mood, and that is a sad thing. As far as youth is concerned, that's a very important aspect of what we need to take into account. The youth has taken the lead, and demographically also, young people constitute about 60% of the population below the age of about 25, and about 40% of the population are teenagers or below. And the youth have lost faith, by and large, in the political process overall.
Right. Okay, I'm going to take that point that you just made forward. Now, you know, David is suggesting, Rana Banerjee, that, you know, past strategies, or this issue has been going on for several decades now, and, you know, past strategies too have not worked, clearly, because that's why we're sitting down here in our studio and talking about this particular issue. What needs to be done differently going forward?
Well, it's a difficult thing to answer. Basically, the new interlocutor will first have to establish his credibility as an interlocutor, and he will have to do so on the basis of some substantive issues. How does he address the problem of, you know, the concept of azadi, for instance? It's not secession. It's a different concept. It's a concept which the Kashmiris believe has something very intrinsic to do with their identity. So, to tackle that in a non-security format, that will be one aspect. Then the other thing which has to be acknowledged is the Pakistani influence or response to this new tactic. They would try to scuttle the process, but the Kashmiris themselves may not like the process to be scuttled. So that may give some space to the interlocutor to gnaw away at, you know, these insecurities and then establish his own credibility. Again, it will be an ingenious and a difficult process to go forward. There are various possibilities. There are some working group reports which genuinely address Kashmiri concerns which have been left half done. Now, it may be possible to revive some positive actions, to implement some of these non-implemented aspects of the working group reports of 2007, 2008. So, there may be possibilities to start working in this direction and to establish his credibility so that the confidence of the people in Kashmir, what Mr. Devdas has just said, starts, you know, getting restored. Okay. If that happens, progress is possible.
Okay, sure. Progress is possible. Establishing credibility is key, is what you're suggesting. You know, Rajesh Ramachandran, the Prime Minister has tried hard over the last 3 years to try and reach out to the youth of Kashmir. He has spoken about the Kashmir issue at several of his addresses that he's made over the last 3 years. But yet the problem in Kashmir continues. What is the fundamental problem and how do we deal with it?
See, Kashmiri secessionism needs to be seen as the legacy of our partition. Religious secessionism is at the core of the issue. We cannot be blind to this basic fact of life. That is a reality. So how we tackle it, how we address it is the prime issue. So there are various ways and means in which we can bring disillusioned youngsters into the mainstream. But this remains a core, and this remains a core insofar as a normal Indian doesn't want religious secessionism to happen yet again. So there are certain minimum possible and maximum possible concessions on either side. So we need to, for that to arrive at, we need to talk first of all. So this talk, I mean, these whether this has happened, I mean, this is not the first time. K.C. Pant, then N.N. Vora, then the three interlocutors, one of them is part of the panel. So there have been various efforts, various teams, various interlocutors in the past who have tried to reach at certain minimum concessions, certain minimum things over which there can be an agreement between the Indian state and the secessionists. This time, there is absolutely no harm in an Indian police officer, Indian police service officer trying to understand what these minimum possible agreements could be. So it need not always be a politician. A politician, either somebody who's in the government or who is out of the government, who has won an election or lost an election. You know, there is no fixed rule that, you know, it should be only a politician or only an IAS officer and cannot be a police service officer. See, these are people who have been engaging with the stakeholders, and in this case also. I heard one of the panelists talking about the meaningfulness of this exercise. See, in the first reaction, Dineshwar Sharma has not precluded, he has not said that he will not talk to the Hurriyat conference. What I understand is that, you know, he has said that he will talk to all the stakeholders. So if that be the situation, if that be the basic understanding on which he is moving ahead, it is very, very welcome. Sure. So if he is willing to talk to all the stakeholders, then Hurriyat obviously forms part of it. Now it is left to the Hurriyat conference whether they want to come in or not.
Sure.
So last time also, I think it was before the K.C. Pant initiative, some of the Hurriyat leaders were arrested and were kept in a Rajasthan jail and then transferred to Tihar jail over various charges.
Right.
So the NIA, the ongoing NIA investigation doesn't have to hamper the effort.
Okay, sure, fair enough. You know, talking about stakeholders, Ansari, now, you know, Rana Banerjee brought up the issue of Pakistan. Seasoned politician like Farooq Abdullah says if you do not talk to Pakistan, there's no point of having an interlocutor. Where does Pakistan fit into the scheme of things, and do we need to speak to Pakistan?
Well, I look at the J&K issue from the three important angles. You know, number one is the J&K, you know, the regional balance, you know, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, Leh and Kargil. There are regional aspirations apart from you know, the aspirations of the youth from different regions. That needs to be looked into, and that is what we had also suggested, but the government has not initiated anything on that. So that is one aspect of it, because as long as we consider that the Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India, we need to look at all the socio-economic and the regional problems as we see in the rest of the country. Unfortunately, you know, there are comparisons being made, and they people in Ladakh, they say that they are discriminated. In Jammu, people discriminated, and if you look at the Kashmir Valley, they also feel that even if they have been favored, look at what the conditions of the people are. That is one aspect of it. Number two is Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir is integrated through Article 370. This is a temporary provision. Now for 70 years we are keeping it a temporary. Either you abrogate it or you make it permanent, you know. So that is going to be an important step which the central government has to take about it. As long as you keep it in a fluid condition, of course there are people who are politically more resilient, they have their own aspirations. They will be talking of different things at different points of time. Now the third is, of course, Pakistan. Pakistan is occupying part of the Kashmir. POK is with them. We have not been bothering about the China's investment in POK. We have not made Halla Gulla, but at the same time, remember the 94 Parliament resolution, which make it obligatory for us to acquire POK, where the POK is going to Pakistan and China. So, I mean, these are all the different dimensions of it, and we really don't know how we are going to look at it. But at the most, I can say that the present government representatives, he will be, as it was pointed out, one of our panelists, will be able to look into some of the security related lapses, and probably he being an expert in this area, he will see to it that the intelligence information is properly collected, analyzed and disseminated, so that
the security related issues can be plugged, is what you're suggesting.
Exactly. I think that is the area where it could be done. Otherwise, I don't see much happening insofar as withdrawal of Afsar, PSA is concerned. Not much happening about the employment position, in Jammu and Kashmir, or even redressing other grievances which has been talked about by the Prime Minister, that we need to resolve it by hugging the Kashmiris. Our Mufti Sahib used to say that you apply the healing touch. So that is not forthcoming. This is what I'm trying to say.
There's no healing touch is what you're suggesting. Okay, fine. Fair enough. David Devdas, in May this year, the Home Minister suggested that India will see a transformed Kashmir in a year. Have we started moving in that direction? It's been about 5 or 6 months now since the Home Minister made that statement. Are we moving anywhere in that direction? Well, I think we seem to have lost the line there with David Devdas, but let's take the discussion forward. Dealing with the Kashmir problem as such, Mr. Banerjee, we've spoken at length with what needs to be done and what does not need to be done. But, in the near future, what do you see happening and what aspects need to be addressed at the earliest?
Well, every issue which we have flagged so far needs to be addressed simultaneously. Of course, the security situation will have to be carefully watched, and if there is any uptick in, either the violence or the attacks on establishment, these will have to be firmly put down, and this really will not be an integral part of the interlocutor's work. But one of the issues which I would like to flag, which haven't been discussed so far, is the question of religion, how religion has affected the situation in Kashmir, the radical Islamic influences which have come in over the last 15 to 20 years, how they have militated against the basic concept of Kashmiriyat, which is a more, what shall I say, inclusive variant of, Sufism plus, traditional Kashmiri practices, which have been the hallmark of, the identity, the Kashmiri identity. Can that be restored? Can some steps be taken to move in that direction through the interlocutors' good offices? This is one of the aspects which could be considered. So there will be a whole gamut of issues which could be taken up, and I would suggest that the way forward would be to seek to establish one's credibility through such actions which are integral to the Kashmiri mindset, and then slowly move forward to address the very hardened alienation which we see nowadays in some parts of South Kashmir and elsewhere in the valley.
Yes.
And so we would need to work in a very sustained manner to move forward in this.
And not expect results,
Absolutely not. I mean, not in the short term.
Not in the short term, yes. Going forward, Rajesh Ramachandran, do you believe that we need to use a mix of both aggression as well as dialogue to deal with the existing problem in the valley?
No, these are two completely different aspects of the problem. One is the militancy, but the terrorist attacks. See, even Hizbul Mujahideen has been termed as a terrorist organization by the US. Salahuddin, the homegrown leader of militant Islam in the valley, Sayyid Salahuddin has been termed a terrorist by the US. And Lashkar-e-Toiba and the other organization, these have been termed terrorist organizations by China as well. So these are all, on one side is Pakistan promoted, Pakistan sponsored terrorist activities in the valley, and some of which spill over to the mainland in our cities as well. So that is one aspect of it. The other aspect is that these are our citizens. Whatever they may say, whatever secessionist noise that may emanate from the valley because of various actors, because of various people prompting them, we need to understand them. We need to extend our hand of help to them as fellow citizens. We need to look at Kashmiris only and only as fellow citizens.
Sure.
Just as there are Muslims in almost every district of India, there are Muslims in this valley also. So the secessionist noise need not turn us against the problems of the valley. And so the problems of the valley, if they are tackled as we tackle the problems elsewhere, so that is why I personally am opposed to the use of pellet guns, because we did not use pellet guns in Murthal.
Right.
We don't use pellet guns elsewhere. See, every other day at one place or the other, some students or some children would be throwing stones at the police.
You know, because of paucity of time.
At those places, we don't use pellet guns.
I'm going to cut you short due to paucity of time. I'm sorry to cut you short, Rajesh, Ramachandran, but I've got just 2 minutes left on the program. So very quick closing comments from both my other panelists who have not had a say. You know, is the Kashmir problem...
I'm back with you, by the way.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to let you close the show for us with your closing comments. But before that, Ansari first, you know, are we overcomplicating things in Kashmir?
Yes, to an extent, because are not addressing the root cause of the problem, and that is that India is a huge, vibrant democratic country, and it needs to ensure that the democratic norms are adhered to in every nook and corner of the country. I'm saying so because in Jammu and Kashmir, democratic processes have always been hampered because there had not been free and fair elections, you know, barring a few here and there. You may recall in 2011, after 33 years, there was a panchayat election and people participated to the extent of 80 to 85%. Right. And recently, when we had elections, only 7% people participated. So why is it that we have not been able to infuse the idea of democracy and resolve many of the problems? Yeah, mainstreaming.
Final closing comment from David Devdas, you know, the way forward really as far as Kashmir is concerned.
I missed most of the conversation, I'm afraid, but let me just very quickly say, I call for a clear, consistent, integrated, and clearly enunciated policy that is clearly put forward and that is integrated. We can't have a military approach on this side and a talks approach on that side and some other approach on another side. It has to be a balanced and integrated and clearly enunciated approach.
Okay, on that note, then I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank Rana Banerjee, Ansari, Rajesh Ramachandran and David Devdas for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.